thank you all for coming. We're completely thrilled at EdSoc to be hosting this evening with Activate. Most of all, welcome to our panelists. We are completely grateful as well for you to be joining us tonight with your busy schedules and array of other extracurricular requirements that I'm sure you have going. But tonight we'll be focusing on you and also our questions from the panel, to our panel from the audience. So the main, I guess, purpose of tonight is just to help everyone understand the challenges and also the opportunities that come with becoming a teacher, and also any questions that you might have of, you know, career paths that our panelists have gone over the many years that they all share together with Rebekah and Sharon, for example, our UTS alumni grads that finished just last year, and then we have Warren, for example, with 50 years experience in the teaching industry. So first of all, I'd just also like to congratulate Amy on landing her role at New South Wales Department of Education. So she'll also have a lot of information about further opportunities and scholarships and even career development prospects for us as teachers. So I'll also just like to introduce Kurt. He's from EdSoc as well. So if you're keen on jumping on board, he can give you a hint as to what it's like being as part of the committee and getting involved in networking as well. So without further ado, I suppose we should introduce our panelists. As I mentioned before, we have Rebekah. So Rebekah is a UTS graduate from 2019 and was also thrown into the deep end when it comes to teaching. She currently teaches at an SSP, which is a school for special purposes. And I think, Rebekah, if you'd like to introduce yourself, you could tell us more about that.
Sure. So I'm going to apologise. My mum is teaching flute lessons in my house. So if it's a bit whistly, hopefully I think she finishes at 6:30, so it shouldn't be too long. But yeah, I currently teach in a school for a specific purpose. We are an intellectual disability school. So all the students at our school have moderate to severe disabilities. Pretty sure all the ones in my class from their categories are classed as severe. The class I teach is considered a multi-categorical class in the sense that I have, all my students have an intellectual disability, and I have another two with hearing impairments and one with a language disorder as well. So it's a bit full on. I've got two with Down syndrome, one of which also has autism, another two with autism, and one with just a general global developmental delay. So it's very full on, and it's a K to 3 class. So I actually have one kindergarten student, 2 year 2s, and 3 year 2s, yeah, and 1 year 3. So it's a bit of a different experience to what I expected for this year, but it's been a lot of fun.
Definitely. We can imagine there's going to be a lot of challenges and also rewarding aspects of your path into teaching. And similarly, Sharon, you also graduated last year. So Sharon Ono was part of the Laurie Brady nominees and graduated with an opportunity to become a classroom teacher full-time, I believe, at Paddington Primary School. If you'd like to take away, Sharon.
Yeah, so I am a graduate teacher. I teach a stage 1 class, both year 1 and year 2 students at Paddington Public School in the city. It's a small school, but it's been a really nice and roller coaster year that I've had. I did start off the year actually teaching an opportunity class with gifted and high potential students. And then I was offered a permanent position at Paddington. So I made the switch over.
Wow, that sounds really interesting, especially having to change between schools. I can imagine that might have been heartbreaking, starting with a certain class and then transitioning so soon.
Yeah, I mean, it was day 2 of the school year when I got the offer, and I had to do my 4 weeks with the class before I rolled over, which was a really interesting period. But I still get emails from the class from my 5-6 students updating me on their schooling lives.
Oh, that's so sweet. And then also I should mention Rebekah and Sharon, they also have their own teaching Instagrams. So we've shared that on our socials. So check that out. They're really, really cool. And then we have Amy Weber. Hi. So she is a previous alumni from UTS as well, studied at Ku-ring-gai campus and worked as a teacher for a few years, and then also has moved on to a position at the New South Wales Department of Education. Amy, would you like to say something?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So yes, I studied at UTS primary teaching in Ku-ring-gai. Following that, the following year, I started teaching in a temporary role and then began teaching at my permanent school, at a school in Southwest Sydney. So it's a small primary school there, and I taught there for about 4 years, teaching across all different stage levels. And last year, I accepted a secondment with the New South Wales Department of Education as a senior education officer. So I work with the Teach New South Wales team, and a lot of the work we do is based around promoting opportunities to pre-service teachers like yourselves, and highlighting some of the kind of specific scholarship and employment opportunities. And I guess that's kind of something to point out as well, that as a permanent teacher with the department, you can maintain right of return to your permanent position. So what I'm doing now in my current role, I can actually maintain my permanent teaching position and return to my teaching position when I'm ready. So that's something that I plan to do and kind of go back to teaching in a bit.
Well, that sounds like a lot of interesting information you might be able to provide to us about some intel with your scholarships, but also your secondment, how you've progressed from being a teacher to also working for the Department of Education. So we'll definitely talk about that soon. I'm sure lots of people have questions about what it means to teach rurally and having all those opportunities as well. And then last but not least, we do have Warren Poole. Some of you may remember him from around campus or maybe even Avalon Bunnings and seen him down the road. He's a classic when it comes to telling us stories about being a teacher and also his experience of being a principal. And Warren, would you like to take the mic?
Hi, Steph. Thanks very much. Yeah, I've been involved with education for in excess of 40 years. It's a career which I've loved every minute of, although some days have been better than others. I spent 25 years as a school principal. I joined UTS about 8 years ago, and one of my concerns, I'm involved with the Tertiary Supervision Program and the Professional Experience team. One of my concerns was for our final year students, no one was really telling them how to go about getting a job. And that's why I suppose it's an area that I forged at UTS, just to support the final year students, provide them with the opportunities and insights from a long experience in education.
Thanks, Warren. Well, Warren also has a lot of workshops that we'll mention later in the session tonight about not only becoming a teacher, but also acing the interview and all the niche little practice sessions that we'll need in order to land that role.
Well, I think we've got Amy here, who's the expert now. I'm really proud of Amy.
Well, I suppose also, oh, pardon, did you say something, Amy?
Okay, sorry, go on.
I was just thinking that perhaps with all these introductions, everyone comes from a different range of getting into teaching. I'd really like to talk about how did you get into the current role that you're in? So what was the transition like from being a new grad teacher or even maybe in your 4th year to where you are currently now? And would you say it was a common path, or maybe in Rebekah's case, not so common? Well, Rebekah, would you like to start first?
Sure. I don't even know where to start. I think where it really began was I was trying to apply for some jobs right at the very end of term 4 last year. It took a really long time for me to get my number through the department, so I couldn't apply for anything. And anything I did apply for, I didn't get an interview because I hadn't been approved yet. And I just hit a wall. I was like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's expected. So I actually called a family friend that I knew was a deputy, and she called me back and she said, look, come over in the holidays and I'll teach you how to do it. But I'm just starting out as a new principal at this school. Would you be interested in 5 weeks of casual work? And I said, Yeah, tell me about the school. I know you're in special education. So she gave me a spiel about it was a support unit that was becoming its own independent SSP, and it was going to be intellectual disabilities. I was like, you know what? I can probably do that. I think that would be okay. 5 weeks at the start of term 1, I thought it's crazy to say no. She gave me a heads up a few weeks into term 1 that they were having issues with advertising the position, and asked if I'd be happy to go to the end of term. And then we kind of hit COVID, and due to my health, I had to isolate. So she put me on a contract so I could work from home, and I'm still there. Still there. Longest 5-week casual block of my life, but it's been great. They've actually managed to this term advertise positions, so they're going through all that process at the moment. So I don't know how much longer I'll be there for, but it's been a fantastic experience. I think it's probably like fairly common. You get to know a school by casual teaching and they start to offer you more work. But I think definitely the area is quite it's a very niche area of education to go into.
For sure. And did you find when you were still at uni, did you have many opportunities to find out what an SSP school is? Did you have that help with transitioning?
I actually did. I had probably my best friend at uni, actually 2 of them, they did the inclusive education sub-major. So one of them worked in a behaviour SSP. She didn't work. She did one of her cracks there. So I did have an idea of what it was and a little bit of what I was getting into, but my grandma probably worked in special education settings for the last 15, 20 years of her career. So I've grown up going and seeing her classroom and seeing her kids. So I've been quite exposed to it anyway. And I had some really unique experiences on my pracs in mainstream settings where I had kids with quite severe autism, or I had I actually got to work with a student who was legally blind one year, which was really awesome. So I think I was exposed to a lot of things, and it gave me the confidence to just say, yeah, I'll do it. I'll have a go.
Wow, your resilience is certainly inspiring, and having to be flexible through your transition into pretty much the deep end. So thanks for that. How about you, Sharon, with your transition out of uni? How did you get into the teaching profession?
I think my transition was pretty smooth. I pretty much replicated the journey of graduate teachers from UTS from the year above. I remember I kind of had like a calendar of things I had to do in my final year of uni, and pretty much just ticked all of that off. I remember I booked my interview for your approval to teach application process in April. Then I started volunteering at various schools in May just to get a feel for how schools were. Did my interview in August, got approved in September. And I guess being a high achieving graduate, that I suppose identified me as potentially being contacted by the department for the permanent position. But I do remember at the end of the year applying for 2 schools and doing interviews for those 2 schools, and then getting the position at one. So I had planned for a 5-6 class, like I said earlier, which then obviously got turned over into a 1-2 class for my permanent position at Paddo. But smooth journey, I think. I don't think I had too many roller coaster bumps. I definitely didn't want to put all my eggs in one basket, so I was definitely had few opportunities, but I knew if possible I wanted a permanent position just for job security.
Yeah, definitely. So I can imagine having a lot of volunteering opportunities and seeking out those chances before you graduate might improve the likelihood of you landing maybe a full-time role in that. But then I guess in Rebekah's instance, it didn't really work out that way. So it's interesting having that juxtaposition between the two. So how about you, Amy? Did you have a relatively smooth transition from uni, or more of a rocky, thrown in the deep end?
I did. I had a pretty smooth transition. I think it was maybe the only thing that I was uncertain about is the type of employment that I might be working in. I kind of had this idea that I would start that I wanted to get a permanent job and that's what I should be applying for. But in actual fact, I first transitioned into a temporary role. So similar to a lot of students, I started out casual teaching in my final year of uni, and my first casual day was at the school that I'd just completed my internship at, which I think is kind of a good point to highlight, that you can secure future employment for yourselves by making really good connections with your prac schools, so networking with your prac schools as well. And then I was handing out CVs to a lot of schools to casual teach at, and a school that I had handed my CV in at contacted me, I think in the final week of term 4 for that year, asking me to come in for an interview for a temporary position. So then I was working in a temporary role. I had a year contract there, and I completed a term at that school before then being contacted about my permanent role. So I think that's probably the aspect that wasn't as smooth for me. I didn't realize that you can be transitioning halfway through the year into a permanent role. It won't necessarily be a nice, neat start at the beginning of the year. So I left my kindergarten class that I just got set up and started at a new school. So I think that's probably my takeaway from that you might have to be a bit flexible and open to different types of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And treating each prac, I suppose, like a job interview. I think, Warren, being our tertiary supervision coordinator, you'd have a bit more advice on either smoothing out that transition, or even maybe could you tell us, is it more common to have such a smooth transition or be jumped straight into the deep end like Rebekah?
Look, it does vary. And, we see some great teachers coming out of UTS who we think will be given priority employment, and they don't. And we see others and we think, we're pleased they've got priority employment. So it varies. It's a case-by-case situation with all of them. A lot depends where you want to teach, quite frankly. If you're prepared to go to the country, there are plenty of opportunities. So, I think what Amy said, your final professional experience is the job interview. As a principal, I always gave my 4th year, my interns, their first day of teaching was on their class that they'd done their internship. And it was just to give my teachers a thank you, but also to give those people the opportunity just to come in under the class as a teacher that they know, just to give them that transition.
Thanks, Warren. And I was just thinking as well, you've been a teacher yourself and you would have started somewhere. What was your transition to teaching like?
My transition, I got a scholarship. I actually got 3 scholarships. And I wisely picked the one that I knew had a good football team. And I was actually trained in teaching in small schools in the country. And like Rebekah, my first appointment was to the city, working in an SSB school. And I'd had no preparation for it. So I was quickly learning on the job. So, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. It seems like that's something we'll definitely love to talk about, is not only the transition process, maybe eventually with Amy and your intel with working with Teach New South Wales, but also Warren, having, your connections with schools. I think people would appreciate having more maybe suggestions on what school might work for them. And then, like you were mentioning before in our chat, there's 90 to 95% grads of UTS.
Yeah. And quite often, and what's happening now, I'm sure Amy knows about this, but like Amy and what Sharon were talking about, Rebekah, people are actually getting jobs in their final year. Be it temp jobs, some of them getting permanent jobs, or getting a permanent offer, but actually teaching at the school temp till it starts the next year. So UTS does have a very high strike rate in final year students getting jobs, and often it's in that area because your final professional experience is a 4-week interview. You're being interviewed from the moment you walk into school. You might know it, but you are.
Well, right, Warren. Thanks so much for that, guys. So I'd like to transition over to Kurt. So we had a question come through about the opportunities, and we did touch on that and how that changes how you transition out of uni. So Kurt, would you like to take that away?
Yeah, sure. What we wanted to know is, this can be for anyone on the panel as well, good to get different perspectives. But maybe we could offer some advice and ask for what type of opportunities there are for newly graduated students looking to make it in the teaching industry. So just maybe offering to the viewers like what they can be doing and what the extra step can be. If maybe Amy, you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I really want to point out right now, because scholarships have just opened, is that the department offers future teacher scholarships each year. So depending on where you are in your degree and depending on what subject areas you're training to teach in, you could be eligible for scholarships that offer financial support. And I think one of the best parts is the guaranteed permanent job that scholarships offer. So basically, if you are successful in applying for a scholarship, the ones open currently are for 2021, then you'd start receiving support as of next year, and you'd be guaranteed a permanent job for when you finish. So I think if you are someone whose goal is permanency in teaching, then the scholarships offer exactly that. So it's definitely worth looking into. That said, the opportunities are around areas of high demand. So high demand areas of teaching are those subject areas where teachers are in short supply in New South Wales, but also all around Australia. So those areas are things like physics, maths, inclusive and special education, school counselling, but also there's high demand locations. So as Warren mentioned, being open to teaching in rural and remote areas offers a lot of opportunity. So, and I'd probably highlight that as well, even separate from the scholarships. If you are someone who's open to teaching in a rural and remote area, that's going to offer you some really high employment prospects and progression opportunities as well. So if you're someone who has a kind of career path in mind and you'd like to progress to leadership positions, working in a rural and remote area might actually offer you quicker progression in terms of working towards an assistant principal or head teacher role.
Yeah, and good experiences as well. I think, yeah, that would be just such a good experience for anyone in mind. Like maybe the city would just be, it would be a good change to go somewhere rural as well. So you're not only enjoying the job and the prospect, but it's good to be somewhere where it's like more peaceful and like I'm assuming you'd have more intimate classroom as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's a different school setting and it's a different living setting. It might not be for everyone, but if you get a chance to try it while you're at uni and go on one of those rural placements where you don't have any commitment to work there, you can just go and try it out. And if you find that that kind of living setup is for you and you enjoy that setting, then the benefits definitely make it worth it.
Yeah, definitely. And Sharon as well, do you have any advice?
I guess the more whether experience that you have in schools, whether it be casual teaching or volunteering, the more experience, the better. You also get a feel for the different schools if you're picky. And I guess, yeah, the more experience you have, the more you have under your belt. I certainly felt like being at uni and theorizing what a good teacher does and what a good teacher is was helpful, but also the practical element of being in a school is just as valuable, if not more, because it is so contextualized and individualized as to what you can do and what you want to do. So definitely any experience you can get, the better.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think it's also important to go the extra mile, not only with the social side of uni, but also helping to facilitate the social side as well. Just stuff like being on the committee and getting first-hand advice from people such as Warren and the likes of Don Carter. I think that's what you're going towards as well. Just those extra steps, they all amount to something, basically, yeah.
And when you do face challenges, having a support network of various people is valuable.
Yeah, sure. And Rebekah as well, did you have any advice, any opportunity?
Yeah, I agree big time with Sharon. I think it comes down to the relationships you have with schools, whether that's the schools that you've done your pracs at. That was aside from the school I'm at now, I was able to get some prac casual work right at the end of term 4 from one of my prac schools, which was fantastic. But any schools in your area that you think you'd ever be interested in teaching at, especially while you're at uni. I know it's a bit hard at the moment, but for people that aren't in their 4th year and have a bit more time up their sleeve, go and call principals and ask if you can volunteer. Just ask if you can go in for half an hour a week, an hour a week, and get to know different schools and let them really get to know who you are and see that you're dedicated and that you're going to be worth employing. I think that's a big thing that you can do for yourself.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree.
To that, Kurt, one of the things that I think Sharon mentioned, which I think is really important to remember, is in some schools there might be a job next year, but if you have established a reputation with that principal at that school where you're currently working, who sadly has to say, sorry, there's no job here next year, that principal, as a support person, can make recommendations to other local principals. And I can think of quite a few UTS people who have been in that situation where the principal said, look, sorry, no job, but you need to go and ring such and such a principal. Of course, they're waiting for your phone call. So,
okay, definitely. And stemming from that as well, we have another question. We got, so what do you think principals in schools, institutions are looking for in employers and recent graduates? So what do you think the main characteristics and the certificates they're looking for, they're wishing to employ you?
Well, Amy, Sharon?
Well, I can start. I guess from what I've seen, they want to see commitment and also your ability to work in a team, because whilst you might think you're in the classroom by yourself, you're still part of a team, you're still part of a whole school team as well, and a stage team perhaps. So I think not having those skills would put you at quite a disadvantage. And commitment, not just to your students, but also to your workmates, the other teachers in your school, to the parents, to yourself. Yeah, I think because I have seen it's noticeable when someone is not committed. It's noticeable when someone is not wanting to be a team player, and it does affect the way that the school runs, just on a day-to-day, but also weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So I'd say those two.
Yeah, it would affect morale a lot, I can imagine. Amy, do you have any insight?
Yeah, I just want to add to what Sharon said about being a collaborative staff member of the staff, I think is a huge thing. So being able to work as a team and having those communication skills, because as a teacher, you are essentially employed to be a communicator. You're communicating with your students, you're communicating with your colleagues, parents, and the wider community. Yeah, and just building on what Sharon said about collaborating with staff, being someone who's both willing to enter a school and acknowledge that there are teachers in different areas of expertise within the school and that you're willing to learn from them, but then also that you could be bringing your own area of expertise to the school. Even as a new graduate, an early career teacher, teachers bring all different types of expertise, and you can be leading within your early years of teaching as well. So showing the school and the principal that you have a passion, or you might have an area that you've built up a level of knowledge within, that you're going to be willing to communicate with staff and collaboratively, because schools are constantly looking for ways to implement new ways of approaching things to improve outcomes for students. I think, just as a quick example, as I said, I worked one term as a temporary teacher before I moved to my permanent role. Within that one term at a school, I was just a member of the positive behaviour for learning team at that school. I wasn't yet an expert in PBL, but I had been at a school where they had already implemented PBL. When I started in my permanent role, they were just getting started with PBL. So they then looked to me and said, well, you've done it. You can now lead the PBL team. So there's not one thing that you need to bring to a school. Wherever you can bring your expertise and bring it with communication and the willingness to collaborate, I think that's a skill that principals look for.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. That's really good as well. It's great. Rebekah, what do you think?
I've worked with some really great principals as a prac student who actually told me during my placements what kind of things I looked for. So one of them, his big thing was initiative, and if he saw that a casual teacher or even a prac student was able to take the initiative and see what needed doing. This conversation came up because after assembly and after we dismissed the kids, I started stacking their chairs up in the hall. I was like, no biggie, like my teacher's doing it, I'll help. But he actually stopped me in and chatted to me about how important that was, and that was something that he identified in young teachers, and meant that he knew that they were going to work hard and that they were going to see where things needed to be done and do something about them. They weren't just going to wait. And I think the other one, the big one that I got last year from my principal, was a willingness to learn how the school works and to adapt yourself to the school. So they were very particular with how they presented lessons. Everything had to have a learning intention and a success criteria. Big focus on visible learning at this school. And they had lots of casual teachers that were coming in and they weren't doing the work. And it was really frustrating for the classroom teacher to come back in and go to teach something and realise their kids haven't done any of the last week's maths work. They have no idea what's going on. So that was something that, and not just the principal, but the stage AP as well, really drilled that home to me, was if you get left work, do it, and try your best to do it how the rest of the school does it.
Warren, that sounds like that was a challenge for you. I can imagine as a principal having a lot of teachers come and go as casuals and possibly leave a bigger pile than they came in with.
Those three answers were fantastic. Seriously, the words that came out, passion, teamwork, commitment, initiative, those words, that's what you're looking for, really. And I've employed teachers of all shapes and sizes. But if they tick those 4 boxes, that's really what you want from the beginning teacher. And I'd often say to the beginning teacher, just prove to me you're a great teacher. That's all I want to see, right? I want to see passion, I want to see teamwork. They were fantastic answers. They were brilliant answers. They couldn't top them.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that. So then I was thinking as well, what, other than transitioning out of uni and finding the challenges of getting your feet into the role, what other challenges do you experience in your role and what advice do you have about those? Let's start with Amy.
I think something that I found really challenging in my first year was learning to differentiate for a range of different needs within my class. So that's something that surprised me because I definitely had experience catering for different student needs within a classroom on my pracs. Because I think any classroom you go into, you'll notice that students you need to cater for have completely different learning requirements and might be at different levels. But I know the class that I had in my first year had a number of students who had additional learning needs. And I came in as a new teacher, and that's something that I found really challenging because I spent a lot of that first year really focusing on managing behaviour in my classroom to create an environment where all students could learn, but also diverse learning needs. And I think it was a really useful experience in my teaching practice because it's something that I started to learn really early on, being in a really interesting class. And I definitely had support through it. So I think you really need to let teachers know where you need support because your colleagues will help you and support you. A lot of the colleagues that I had at my school had taught those students before, and they could provide me with a lot of advice about what would help them to learn best. And I also sought advice from within the department as well. So I had an assistant principal in special education come out to help observe me while I taught and offer advice for things that I could improve on. So I think wherever you have challenges in your classroom, your focus should be seeking as much feedback as you can and implementing things that are going to have the biggest impact on student outcomes.
Absolutely. Communication's key. Excuse me. Making the most of those connections that you have will definitely, I think, soothe those challenges. How about you, Sharon, in your role?
I think the most challenging aspect that I probably didn't consider, and I probably should have, is my own mental state, I think. I'm quite I have a reflective personality, and I should have known better, but I find that sometimes I harp on what's not working, without an even balance between what is working and what isn't working. I guess to add on to what Amy said, it is the differentiating of all the various diverse learners and their needs, and just trying to prioritize and organize my thoughts as to what I should tackle has been a bit of a challenge, followed by, I guess, I think it's just understanding for myself how much I can put on my plate, and managing that and breaking that down for what works for me has probably been my main challenge this year so far.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for that, Sharon. And I was thinking about, Rebekah, how you mentioned COVID affecting your role as well, and having to teach online. I can imagine that'd be tricky. We did have a question in the chat asking about COVID, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But what for you did you find so much of a challenge in your role, or transitioning to become a teacher?
I think something that I knew it in as a fact, but to actually experience was that I couldn't do everything on my own. There was no way anyone expected me to. My principal actually told me on my first day, if you get to the end of today and you hate it and it's not for you, don't come back tomorrow. If you need to go and have a cry in the staff room, and there's been a few times where I've just cried at school and I've had to ask for help because I just haven't known what I was doing or things weren't working. And the biggest lesson that I've learned is to ask for help when things aren't working. And some of them were out of my control. I had a student come back from remote learning with far greater behaviours than he'd ever really had at school, and was actually quite violent. And while he wasn't hurting me, I was always on edge. I was incredibly emotionally drained from having to pull him off other kids and make sure other kids were okay. And I did all the right things. I documented it. I talked to my principal and my supervisor about it. And then after a couple of weeks, my supervisor sat me down and she said, look, we think we need to put him in a different class. Are you okay with that? I said, you know what? That's what I felt for a while. It's been so much better. Another time was the SLSO and me and the kids were just not the right combination. And I'd been able to have someone else for a week while mine was away sick, and she came back, and everything fell apart. It was the last week of school too, so it fell apart really well. And I just said to my deputy, I said, look, I'm really struggling today. I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to cry, and I will cry if I talk about it, but I just need to let you know I'm not coping today. And she actually had already discussed potential staff changes anyway, and I've ended up with a third SLSO for this year, this term, and it's just completely different. Just asking for help, especially when you can't change it on your own, it makes a huge difference. And you're allowed to ask for help.
Yeah, and it takes courage as well to ask for it, and to be in the right school,
absolutely,
the right culture and climate to ask those kind of questions. It takes a lot out of you, let alone being in that situation to begin with. So I do remember you saying something about an SLSO changing your day on Instagram. I suppose that must have been really rewarding as well, to take that away and possibly make a new friendship.
Absolutely. So I feel like I'm going to give a bit of background. My first SLSO this year was fantastic. She could read my mind. I'd have this idea and turn to her and she'd say the same thing. I was like, how are you thinking what I'm thinking in my head? It was amazing. Yeah, and then there were other issues in the school. There were other staff combinations that weren't working. So they shuffled all the SLSOs around. And I had another beautiful SLSO that just didn't have the handle on my kids' behaviour. So I would go to work. I would be myself for 45 minutes. I'd be cranking Miss Beck just about the whole school day because I had kids that were just hitting and were just dropping and refusing to wash their hands to eat, or refusing to go to the toilet, just really silly things, because they knew the SLSO would pull them up on it. And it was exhausting. And I get to the end of the day and just be like, I don't even want to do reports today. I just want to go home because I'm just tired. And so just having an opportunity to work with someone different, someone who knew my kids really well, and isn't afraid to get cranky at them for me. It's been so much better because it's not just me all the time. I've got someone else to back me when they are being naughty, but I've actually got someone else who can do crowd control for me as well while I'm trying to work. It's not all on me anymore, which is just really, really nice. It's really nice when the combination just lines up and you've got the right kids and the right staff for those kids. It's just beautiful.
Definitely. I can imagine having those workplace relationships and people supporting you and listening to your needs as a teacher would make all the difference, and the students would as well,
Yeah.
So how about you, Sharon? With your current role, what are the benefits of what do you love so much about being a teacher, and do you have any advice on making the most of reaping those benefits?
Sorry, what was the question? Sorry.
What's the most rewarding and I suppose the most beneficial aspect of your role as being a teacher in the classroom?
I guess the most rewarding part is seeing the growth of your students. I've got younger students, so the growth is immense. You hear parent perceptions of their child, and then so they have a perception of their child, and then you kind of show the parents another side of their child, and seeing the parents excited to see the growth of their child and also seeing the child excited about their growth is really rewarding. I have a few challenging students whose growth is mainly them, but seeing their growth is just super exciting to see, and it makes this whole profession so worth it, especially because that was pretty much the reason why I joined this industry. So then seeing it in your first year is kind of a nice way to monitor that everything is going well.
Definitely. And that's the most, I think, crucial part about being a teacher is that they see you more than they might see their parents in a day, and you have that strong impact on seeing them grow, and any little thing you might say might stick with them 50 years down the track, and think back, oh wow, I had a really good teacher in high school or primary, and think about hopefully that their child would have a good teacher as well. So how about you, Amy? Any memories or fond aspects of your role as being a past teacher and also your secondment?
Definitely the relationships that you build with the students. And I think for me as well, it's something that I love is being part of a school community as well. So especially if you get the chance to stay at a school over a long period of time, you get to know the students that you teach that year, you get to know their families, you actually feel a part of the community. They know you just as well as you get to know them. And I think, something that I did last week, actually, I got to go out to my school to do some filming that we were doing with my team. So we were getting some footage of students in the classrooms with their teachers. And it was so nice getting to go back and see all the students that I taught, because they remember you and they want to come up and talk to you. So I think, just that really positive aspect of the relationships that you build with them, and knowing that the students are appreciative of the teaching that you've done with them, and they've taken a lot away from what you've taught as well. I think my role within Teach New South Wales, the part that I love about it, you could probably also connect back to teaching as well. The part that I love about it is getting to talk to current teachers and pre-service teachers who are passionate about teaching. I think that's something that I get to do a bit in my role, and you hear so many different perspectives and you learn a lot from other people's experiences. And you can always tell when people are really excited about what they do or about what they're studying to become. And I love that. So I love getting to see the excitement and the passion that teachers have.
Yeah, for sure. And seeing that as a teacher and then transitioning to help other teachers find their feet and provide them opportunities as well I could imagine just as rewarding as well. Now I was just thinking, Rebekah, you were mentioning as well with COVID, we did have a question in the chat. So from Lara, I was curious to know what it's like being first year teachers, Lara was curious, what's it like being first year teacher during COVID, and the blended learning curve?
Yeah, I feel like I should just put it out there. I somehow have this talent for doing everything the hardest way possible. Like, I'm sure I had Warren shaking his head most of last year going, how has she managed to make this as hard as it is? Everything about the whole getting a job, getting my application, trying to get jobs, trying to get my number, it just all went wrong. I don't know how I managed it, but COVID in some ways was one of these rare times where I kind of got the long end of the stick instead of the short end, and I did not have a lot of work to do. I actually got sick probably week 7. I got a throat infection, and I called my respiratory specialist and said, can I go back to work? And he said, no way, you are staying home, which was devastating because I'd had these kids for 6 weeks at this point. I was like, no, they are my life. I need them. They need me. So I had to call my principal and let her know. And I basically just ended up doing admin type things. I had some personalised learning support plans I had to finish. I was given a big chunk of our school program to write for the next term. Just anything that could really get me to do at home to keep me busy. We were asked to record, because we do 3 books a term for English, so we were asked to record us reading those and post them on Seesaw and share the kids' work on Seesaw. But because of their disabilities, they actually weren't able to connect with us online. We couldn't do Zoom or Microsoft Teams or anything. So it was lots of me sending things out and occasionally I might get a photo of one kid doing something, which was nice. But I guess that was the hard bit, was I had no interaction with them for nearly 10 weeks. And that moment when we were all back together and I had all my kids, I was like, I have missed this so much. I've just missed seeing your faces and hearing, not your voices, but your little noises that you make that let me know that you're okay and you're happy. So yeah, it was a really weird, I saw everyone else doing all these great things online and being at school and then at home, whereas I was just typing stuff. I was doing boring stuff. But I did enjoy filming videos of me reading, and I actually asked my principal, I said, hey, while I'm at home, do you mind if I just keep doing this if I've got time, and uploading one a week? So I think I ended up doing 4 that I finished editing and uploaded, and the one kid that watched them enjoyed them. But I've been able to put them on now at the end of the day when I'm trying to get some out the door and some are hanging around. I can put it on for them to watch, which has been really nice.
Definitely. How about you, Sharon? Do you have any insight into how COVID might have impacted your role?
So I guess I don't have another year to compare it to. I guess it feels like it was a long time ago. I guess it's sort of in your rearview mirror because it might happen again. Hopefully not. But it was nice. The school that I was at, we all kind of bonded together and tried to look at it from like a positive lens, and kind of seeing because I had moved to the school a few weeks earlier, a lot of the parents weren't familiar with me, but because I was uploading a lot of the content, including videos, the parents were all sitting with their kids, watching me teach. So a lot of them kind of saw me for the first time through the videos, and which they might not have seen had it just been non-COVID periods. But it was tough, but at the same time, I was able to take on a bit of a role for technology, being one of the younger ones and having used a lot of the platforms. I was able to teach a lot of the other teachers and kind of take on a leadership role in that sense. So in a way, it was there are positives and negatives that came out of it. A lot of the students and families, probably from the feedback we received, didn't really enjoy that period of time. And seeing where the students are at in terms of academically, socially and emotionally, they were pushed back a bit, but I guess that's for everyone in every profession. But yeah, I guess the positive is that I got to be a part of a school community and kind of, take on a challenge with everyone, not just alone.
Can I speak just about 3 things? One, first of all, Rebekah talked about not being scared to ask for help. I can tell you now, principals have a network and they reach out to each other. When they're having a bad day, they ring their mates and they'll talk about it. So it's something you must just practice throughout your whole career. Those contacts that you can say, what do you think about doing if I'm doing this, etc. Or let me tell you how bad my day has been. So you do need to reach out for that support network on staff and the wider teaching community. Sharon talked about that mental health component. We know there's a lot of anxiety out there in teaching, but you do need to look after yourself, right? You really do need to look after yourself because it is a tiring job. It really is. Your advocates will be your partners and your own parents who suddenly realise how hard you people work. And something Amy said about just loving going back to her old school and seeing those students. But earlier this week, as you know, my wife Anne works at UTS. UTS have appointed a new associate professor. And when we saw her name, Anne said, "Oh, I taught her in year 1." And so they made contact. And so this is not an education, by the way. She just said, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Poole." And they started talking as if they were back at Bega West where Anne taught her and how she ended up as becoming an associate professor. So you will have those long-term impacts on the students, and you may not never know the impact. I'm quite sure if Amy goes back in a few more years or to those local high schools, someone will come up and say, "Hello, Miss Webber, do you remember me?" Mm. So really, the insights that you people have provided are absolutely fantastic.
Thanks for that, Warren. And for the second part of your question, Lara, I was thinking it would be great if we had another session like this where we could actually talk more in depth about the actual issues that teachers are currently facing. So not just COVID, but maybe even equity issues and funding. And, if people are more curious about those issues, we'll definitely have another one of these. But as for beginning teaching, I think the blended learning curve I think that would be maybe Amy, would you have any recollection of what it was like when you would come into a school and see that students are learning a little bit differently to say later in the years once technology is developed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think introducing technology, especially into a primary classroom, takes time. So it's not something that you get to see straight away. I know early primary, sometimes you can spend weeks just teaching students how to log on to their computer quickly, but I would encourage you to persevere with that. Don't skip on it because you think, oh, it just takes so much time. It takes me a whole hour to get them up to the library and logged on. Keep persevering because then as they build those skills, you can do so much with teaching and learning if the students know how to access Google Classroom, for example. I think I wasn't present at school throughout learning from home through COVID, but talking to my principal, something that she highlighted is that something that is brought about in the school is that teachers who maybe weren't as keen to use technology in the classroom and to implement new things that they hadn't done before kind of had to give it a go. And now teachers are continuing it. So they found a lot of things that really worked for them in their teaching that they want to keep using now that they're back at school. So there are some really great things that you can do with your class once you implement them. It does take time though.
For sure. Thanks for that, Amy. So we do have other questions coming through. Thanks for sending those through, everyone. Rupinder, Kurt, would you like to?
Yep, sure. So maybe this can be for Warren, just considering all your experience. How can people go about accepting jobs or applying for jobs which are not exactly in their field or specialization? For example, applying for history, but being a student from a business background, or both being part of humanities. So can you give any advice on that, Warren?
Look, that's very common. That is very common. And it's to do with being qualified or experienced. And I've had teachers who are high school trained teachers who have taught in primary schools, And after 2 years, I was satisfied that they were demonstrating the skills required to be a primary teacher, and that they were approved. They weren't qualified, but they were approved to teach in primary schools. The same as at a secondary level, particularly in things like HISI, where you could be teaching business studies, legal studies, geography, history, whatsoever. If you have a passion for it, those opportunities occur all the time. Now, schools, particularly secondary schools, cannot cater for all the interests of the students. So if you have someone, and I say that to all our HISI people, when you get out there, I know you're doing business studies, but also teach geography. At the moment, and Amy should be able to tell us this, there is a shortage of geography teachers. So you get out there and you demonstrate that. And that's what go back to what we said, what I think Amy and Sharon said at the very beginning. They want someone who is committed, someone who is, is passionate about what they're doing. And we had a UTS graduate who would have been, I think, in Amy's year, who went out to the country. She was primary trained. She was actually within 18 months was teaching HSC subjects, but she was in a small rural school. So there are plenty of opportunities like that. You've just got to demonstrate them. You will have that. When someone said, I think Rebekah said initiative, put up your hand, I'd love to teach history. Just does it require you to get up to speed with the syllabus? Yes, it does. But if you're passionate about it, the principal will recognise it. It's very common.
Rupinder, I think I remember you from my secondary class.
Yeah.
I'm sure this is a question many other secondary students will be wondering as well. And I do recall hearing the terms about willingness to teach. Warren, was that Rupinder something you might be curious about as well?
I just like to add to this thing. My question is, I think, partially answered. He has said it is, whatever he said, it applies when you get into the profession or when you get into the school. But what before that? Like, suppose if I'm a recent graduate, so if I see, any application or any job application which, asks me that, okay, they require history students or geography students. So I would definitely be hesitant because I'm from business background. But since it's part of humanities, so do you think I should apply for it?
Yes, because if you look at the way the ads are structured, right, you have to be, it may say someone who is qualified to teach mathematics, so that has been qualified. It may say someone who is experienced to teach mathematics, or it may say someone who is willing to teach mathematics. Now, if you're willing to teach it, that means you're telling me, the principal, that you're prepared to do all the extra work to develop your knowledge of the syllabus for geography or for history. So if you're willing to teach it, then yes, I'll be applying for those jobs, because it means you're bringing to the school not only your business studies, but also a willingness to teach. It could be geography, it could be, it could be history, because you have that passion for it. I have a degree in history. I'm not willing to teach it. Right?
Why is that?
Answers. Yeah, thank you.
Why don't you want to teach history if you're trained in it, Warren? That might happen to myself. I don't really necessarily like economics, but I like food technology.
I'm retired.
Oh, okay. Of course. Well, this is a question from Lara. How can primary trained grads work in a high school? I believe high school can complete casual work in a primary school, but can we do it the other way around? Warren?
No, Amy should know this one.
True, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can do it both ways. So you can teach in a high school as a primary school teacher, and you can teach in a primary school as a high school teacher on a casual basis. In some situations as well, you can also complete temporary contracts. I think for primary, completing a temporary contract in a high school, I think it would likely be on stage 4. So you obviously wouldn't be teaching HSC subjects, but there is in the different school setting.
Oh, sorry.
Why would it agree?
It's lagging.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Sorry, what was that, Steph?
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Please go ahead.
No, I was finished. I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think I haven't personally done it, but it would be the same process as going for casual work within your own regular school setting as well. And then I haven't talked to anyone recently who's done it, but I was actually reading a Facebook post that was on one of the teacher groups that I'm part of, and people were talking about exactly this, and I thought it was really interesting because one of the primary teachers was talking about her experience in a secondary school, and she actually pointed out that the principal loved it because being a primary school teacher and already being prepared to teach as a generalist teacher in different key learning areas, they really appreciated her willingness to teach in those different areas that they needed her as a casual teacher in. So yes, it's definitely possible.
Great, that's good to know, because I was thinking, was the application process any different if you just walking into the school and maybe even handing in a resume or class cover, those kind of things?
It is the same process, but you won't be approved to teach in that area by the department. So what you're approved to teach in by the department is what you can gain permanent work in. So if you're approved to teach as a primary teacher, you won't be able to apply for a permanent position as a secondary teacher.
So if you get on their casual list, could you say I'm also, for example, like a K-12 school, or if, for example, I'm secondary trained, if I go into a primary school and say, hi, I'm willing to teach casual, would you just hand in your resume like that as well?
Yeah, so it would be that same process of having a CV to hand in, being set up on class cover, and being proactive in going and approaching those schools and inquiring about work. So you might want to highlight that you aren't, so if you were a secondary teacher going into a primary school, you might want to highlight, yes, I am trained in secondary, but I'm really passionate about working with students from primary school key learning areas as well. So you might want to highlight that you are excited to teach in a primary school setting.
And the behaviour management strategies might also carry through, I can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you, Sharon? Did you work in a high school yet, or would you plan on that?
No, I don't think I like high school students. Consider, like, when I think about who I was, no, thank you. I'd rather stay with the younger ones, thanks.
Rebekah, yourself?
I actually got asked this by someone recently. They asked if I'd ever teach us, probably like the weekend or something. And I was just like, I'm not even 160 centimetres tall. I'm a very small person. My sister in year 8 is nearly a head taller than me. There's no way anyone could pay me anything to go and work with teenagers. I see them walking down the street and I'm terrified as a 22-year-old of them. So no, not for me.
Well, I have huge respect for primary school teachers. I'm the opposite. I much prefer high school students because primary is very emotionally taxing, and I have the highest respect to you guys because these kids can sometimes call you mom, dad, to have that responsibility on me. Oh my goodness. Excuse me. I think my sense of humour is more tailored towards high school students. I'd probably make a child cry.
Steph, Amy mentioned a generalist teacher. Could you tell us what a generalist teacher in the high school is?
I only have a really basic understanding of this from looking at the applications for secondary school positions, but a generalist teacher is willing to teach in different areas from my understanding. So you wouldn't just be applying to teach history, for example. You'd be willing to take on roles within English, perhaps within maths as well. So you'd be flexible in what you can teach. Is that right, Warren?
That's correct. Well done.
Thank you.
So that may well answer Verinda's question before. Yeah, you'll see schools advertising for a generalist teacher. So they're after someone who's prepared to take maths, geography, science. Now, what happens in a primary school?
That reminds me as well, Rebekah, you were telling me that you didn't actually get trained in special education yet. You've landed that role.
Yeah, I have. So initially, because it was just a casual block and because the principal knew me, she's such a good family friend that I actually tutored her daughter for a while I was at uni. So her daughter was in year 8 at the time. So she didn't know that I could work hard and that I had the ability, having worked with her 2 children with Asperger's, that I could definitely learn to work with other students. And I think knowing my grandma as well, who's a special ed teacher. Yeah, lots of connections, which is good. It was only meant to be 5 weeks. I'm glad it's been longer because I got very attached very quickly. But in applying for the job I currently work in, the application does say, and I actually talked to my supervisor, I said, I'm not qualified. I don't think I can teach here and apply for a job here if I'm not qualified. And she said, well, the application won't say that you need to have a special education degree. It will say that you need to have experience and or willingness to do it. And she said, by the time we get there, you will have experience, and if you're applying, you're obviously willing to do it. So in areas where there's a bit more of a higher demand, my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, but often they will advertise for experience and or a willingness to teach it, which is kind of how and where I'm at.
Yeah, and there are also opportunities as well once you do have opportunities like Rebekah to teach in a role that you have in. There are then pathways as an experienced teacher to gain approval. So it's not something that you can do while you're studying. You can't become a Christian extra subject areas without completing the study to do so. But once you're an experienced teacher teaching in an area that you're not currently in, and you can complete an experienced teacher pathway with in this subject as well.
All right, well, thanks. Let's move on to Haley's question. So she's asking, what advice would you give beginning teachers getting involved and taking on leadership roles? Warren, would you like to start off with this question?
Like I think Sharon answered that. That was just a great, when Sharon went to that school, and we've seen it with our 4th year students now. As I said at the very beginning, prove to me that you're a great teacher. That's my first concern. But if those opportunities present themselves, such as that happened with Sharon with technology, and Amy with PBL. So Amy's talking someone in her, I think it must have been her 2nd year. Sharon in her 1st year. Leadership doesn't have to be, got to be 50 years old. If you've got the energy or the willingness or the experience, you provide that leadership. You look at, and I think Rebekah mentioned the impact of COVID-19 and what's happening in teaching. I know that they're expecting a significant spike in resignations because so many older teachers are going, what is this Zooming and, so I think if the opportunity presents itself, and just 3 people have already given that example where the opportunity presents itself, and that's leadership. And it's, once again, what Rebekah said, it's building your experience as a leader. So,
What's your take, Warren, on people approaching you for transitioning roles within a school? What do you think? What would you recommend?
I'd expect a principal to be fully aware of their staff and targeting people for leadership roles. And you can make those predictions and projections about people. So, and I don't want to embarrass Amy, but in a recent conversation with her, I said, are you involved in the leadership initiatives being conducted by the department? I'd expect a principal to be able to provide that advice, give that direction to those people, because your role is to get the best out of your staff. And if you can see that growth through those opportunities, I mean, Sharon leading the technology at the school, that's the principal's role to make sure that those people are providing those opportunities.
Rebekah, I was wondering, are there many leadership role opportunity openings in SSPs?
I don't know too much about SSPs generally. I do know that all our higher level leadership positions, our deputy and our APs and my principal all signed contracts at the end of last year. So definitely nothing going at my school at the moment. But in terms of leadership, we do have a lot of teams that we're all part of. I think we had to select 3 teams we wanted to work on. So I've actually had the opportunity this year to be one of the leaders. I didn't ask to be the leader, but happened for the garden and farm team. So part of that is I have responsibilities to take my kids out and get the ducks out and put them in the paddock at the start of the day and take them home. Trying to figure out a way to get like compostable scraps down to the ducks every day to feed them, just little things like that. And I think the great thing is that it's not like I'm taking on a second role. It's not like I'm taking on a second full-time or another part-time job. It's just a little bit extra, which is really nice. I've heard of other teachers that I know going out and kind of putting their hand up for things and then it being like doing a separate job on the side. And it's just, it can be a lot. As a first year teacher, I actually did Anne, I think it was her student welfare course last year, and as part of that she actually had an ex-principal come in, and that was one of the questions we asked her, and she said, by all means put your hand up to help, but do not feel, unless you want to, do not feel like as a graduate teacher or even a beginning teacher that you need to be putting your hand up for everything and you need to do it on your own. She actually recommended that if you had any hesitations about taking something that someone was suggesting you do, offer to shadow them or to learn from them how to do it so you've got the skills and the confidence, but you're not taking that on while trying to figure out how on earth you're meant to be a teacher as well.
Thanks for that, Rebekah. Sharon, did you want to add anything?
Well, I guess advice for advice for any teacher, but also beginner teachers wanting to get involved and take on leadership roles, I'd suggest get a feel for the history of whatever role it is that you're taking on board. So for example, when I stepped into a sort of technology leadership role, I wanted to know where teachers were at. And I think it goes without saying, but getting feedback to know where to direct your role is extremely valuable. And then it's also more relevant to the school and the teachers that you're going to be leading. And so I just sent like a quick survey monkey with an email to all the teachers, obviously optional, just to see what response I could get so that I wasn't either starting from scratch and so that it was meaningful for who it was for.
Great, thanks for that, Sharon. And I think just to leave enough time for us to do a bit of networking by the end of this, quick question, Warren, and then we'll go with the rest of the panel. Where do you think teaching will be, or how do you think teaching will progress in the next 5-10 years? What should our maybe on audience thinking about becoming a teacher and not necessarily in a teaching degree, where do you see the end of their degree in the next 5 years?
I think the opportunity, I think the other panellists have just talked about the opportunities that's been presented to them. I'm quite sure that when I taught Rebekah last year and she wouldn't have contemplated working in SSP, I think the impact, and Sharon, going to a year one after, I know what she did on prac, and she did some fantastic stuff on prac. So having to step down to, work on an early stage one. Amy, if you go back, 4 or 5 years ago, Amy was a primary year student. So I'm not too sure what the impact of COVID-19 is going to have on, the teaching profession. I think if you demonstrate initiative and flexibility, you will thrive in teaching. And Amy mentioned that bit about the relationship with children. There will always be, whether it's via Zoom or Teams or whatever, that's what students value. And I think last year we had a presentation. A secondary principal said, students won't care what you know, they want to know that you care. And it's really that relationship that exists. And Sharon talked about working with parents and going back and visiting the schools. I think more and more that intellectual, emotional well-being will really come to the fore in teaching in the very near future.
Do you think teaching will change? Do you think teaching will change much how it's progressed with globalization, technology developments, the implementation of robots? Do you see any new trends coming up?
Oh, look, the impact of technology is significant, but it is more the infrastructure that supports it. And I see amazing things happening in schools, and quite often the teachers are well ahead of what curriculum is actually happening in the schools. So, yeah, some of the things that I've seen operating in the whole area of STEM has been absolutely amazing. And I sit back in awe and see these young teachers doing that, but that's providing, you know, that leadership, not necessarily as having a title leader, but it's being a thought provoker or thought leader in the school to excite other teachers. So yeah, technology will impact. I think emotional intelligence will impact. I think there's some dynamic areas of new learning that's starting to occur. Some of the stuff coming out of Joe Bowler and Richard Doig, that's going to have a significant impact on how we understand, you know, how children learn. And I suppose that the critical thing is that more and more that connection with community. I mean, Kurt mentioned working in a country town. In a country town, with a inner city Paddington, you will still be a respected member of society. Teachers are valued people.
Thanks, Warren. It seems, Rupinder, you've sent another question in. How often do schools look at our e-portfolios? Would anyone like to jump on that question?
I don't have one, if that helps.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither.
However, let me ask Amy, are you proficient?
Yes.
Okay, so how did you go about becoming proficient?
So I started in my first year working towards proficiency, and I started my additional RFF time. So you get that additional RFF time if you're a temporary or permanent teacher in your years. And I started using that to work with my supervisor and start gathering some evidence. So looking at the standards, the international standards for teachers, and then started to gather some things that I thought I could use. So I think gathering it before I even sat down to write anything about them.
So eventually you'll all be doing it, whether it's collecting it in a box or collecting it in a folder or collecting it in an e-portfolio. To become proficient, you have to collect that evidence and present it. So unfortunately, the work you do in undergrad doesn't carry over to become proficient, but it is practice. It's something that, yeah, okay, maybe after your first year, you should start to consider.
All right, well, thanks everyone. So I think at this point, it might be a good opportunity if anyone here attending would like to check on their video and ask a question, whether it's about what we've talked today about becoming a teacher, or if you're curious about the scholarships. Just give a moment. Maybe Rupinder, did you want to ask another question? I can see you there.
Yeah, I just like the prompt response that we don't have any e-portfolio at the moment was really funny for me because I remember a lot of emphasis being laid on having a portfolio and creating it, like creating it for the employees. It was like, I can find it quite contrary because I'm not going into job market at the moment because of the COVID situation. I'm in Victoria, unfortunately, so I'm not going to go in job market for the next year for sure. So I was just, curious that I am into some voluntary works at the moment. So should I include it in my e-portfolio and all that? So I wanted to know if, they see it, but I don't think so now.
Well, I think collecting evidence and just knowing your practice is your own, do it your own way for what works for you. An e-portfolio, I think, or just having your evidence online is obviously a great way to not lose anything. I certainly collect everything on my Google Drive, but it's not so much a e-portfolio that I could immediately send off to someone. But I do think collecting your evidence is a valuable part of teaching. I just don't have an e-portfolio because I don't have anyone to send it to. But I guess if you are to send it to someone, I think it's a fantastic way to send it. It works for you.
Definitely.
The e-portfolios, are they kind of based off the standards?
I think so.
Oh, well then
Memory.
I think it's really valuable as well then, when you're kind of preparing for looking for jobs and for your to teach. When you do go for your interview in your final year, the questions that you'll be asked are really heavily based around the standards for teaching. If you guys are already practicing doing that and reflecting on how you've met the standards, and that's such good practice.
I've seen a lot of websites and people putting blogs up of their e-portfolio. So if you're struggling as to how to start or even collate and make it look, that might be a good place to go and just do a Google search of New South Wales e-portfolio, and I've found a lot of variety of that. Warren, do you have any recommendations about organising an e-portfolio?
Look, first of all, that next year there is a new undergrad degree starting, and from first year there'll be an expectation that you will develop an e-portfolio. And once COVID-19 and not being able to visit schools, we've also encouraged people, not in the final year, but in their PE 1, 2, 3, 4, to actually commence a portfolio, and it's based around, like Amy said, it's based around the standards. So, and look, if you go forward a bit, are schools ready for e-portfolios? No, but it's one of those trends that it is coming, and it will become very much a part of your resume and your experience that you can actually draw on. Because if you start making them public, principals will monitor them, just like they'll monitor your other social media accounts. So just be aware. As Sharon said, it's a great way to collect your evidence.
Yeah, and like if you think about other professions with their LinkedIn, they all have it all online too. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's great practice for accreditation. I think my experience this year with accreditation is I didn't need anywhere near as much pieces of evidence as I expected, but definitely gets you thinking about what you have and what you're able to produce that you can use for particular standards. I think for some reason I thought I had to have one for every single substandard. I've actually only got 5, and so it's just mixing up which ones does it meet. Yeah, it's good practice. It's worth it.
And just before we wrap up, we have one more question from Manuela. It says, I'm qualified to teach high school, but I've been teaching a primary school for the past 10 years. Now I would like to apply to teach Italian in a high school where they require experience teaching years 7 to 11. What should I write in my cover letter? Warren, what do you think?
Well, all depends on what your degree is. So if you have a qualification in Italian or teaching Italian, then you'd have that expectation. But if you want to work in high school, it really is just a case of finding a school that offers Italian and targeting that school with your experience teaching Italian, whether it's primary or high school. Too often students forget that many of them are bilingual, and they think, well, I don't know if I can teach that language, but I think having that bilingual approach, and it's one of the new priority areas, being able to teach a second language or teach a language. So I'd be very much focusing on the schools that offer Italian or that are looking for expanding their language program. So very much so.
Well, I hope that answers your question, Manuela. But now this actually concludes our event. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for tagging along. It really means a lot to us. Because of you, we can actually do these events, and we love helping everyone out. So thank you again. And thank you so much for Warren, for always being there. Sharon, Rebekah, Amy, thank you so much. Fantastic panelists. And yeah, I think it went really well. So thanks again. Thank you to Activate as well for making this all possible. Highly appreciated.
Thanks, guys. So what happens now, Activate will be sending you an email with a few key takeaways. And if you had some friends that weren't able to make it, we do have recordings of this. And then we would really appreciate if you could fill out a feedback survey. And yeah, we think, well, from what we've discussed tonight, sounds like there's a lot more poignant issues that we've got to draw, and even maybe the accreditation process. So stay tuned, and thanks everyone for attending.